I've been asked to talk particularly about Northern nationalists and remembrance. And in doing that, I want to just begin by saying actually our view of how things have been remembered in the past is itself in danger of being misremembered. There's a very simple story which runs something like Unionists parading at every available opportunity to commemorate the war from before it even ended, and nationalists wanting absolutely no part in that. But in fact, that just indicates that we have forgotten how the war was remembered in the immediate years. If you go on to, for example, the Pathé News website and look for scenes of Dublin in 1926, you will see thousands of people on the streets of Dublin in the 1920s commemorating the war. Veterans, certainly not, given the numbers, all Protestants, and poppies were widely sold and widely worn in the Irish Free State at that time. I think we've also, to bring in the, I suppose, loyalist side of commemoration, we have tended to see the conflation of the 1912 to 14 UVF with the Troubles era UVF as a modern feature of murals and marches, and we've seen the Orange Order's role in commemoration as a modern feature. But in fact, some of that, at least as regards the Orange Order, was happening from at least 1917 onwards, and you can make a case that it was actually happening even in July 1916. We've also, though, I think, forgotten the extent to which commemoration could be very bloody in the 1920s. If you go back to the early 20s, when, of course, Belfast was experiencing its own version of troubles then, you'll see that around Armistice Day, there was active conflict on the streets between Protestant shipyard workers and Republicans who took a different perspective. However, undoubtedly there was a period in which nationalists became far more uncomfortable about remembering the war, but it's easy to assume that they stopped doing it completely. The phrase that Tom Hartley has used to describe what happened to nationalist remembrance is that it went underground. It was done very privately. It involved people displaying photographs at home, maybe not all year round, maybe taking them out at certain times of the year, displaying medals, having certificates, having the death penny, marking anniversaries in the way that bereaved people will do, whether they're war dead or members of their family died in peaceful times. And this was not suddenly wiped away. These processes of mourning and commemoration continued. But something did happen. Actually, I think in really from the late 1980s onwards, and some of it was to do with the work of journalists and historians. I think of Kevin Myers, I think of Terry Denman. Terry's work particularly on the 16th Irish Division from the late 80s onwards, I think recovered an element of British military history that was essentially about Irish nationalists in the 16th Irish Division. Then I think the SDLP really opened the door. There was no formal SDLP presence at a Remembrance Sunday event in Northern Ireland until 1992, when Paddy McGowan, the leader of Omagh District Council, decided to lay a wreath at his town ceremony. I think then you have to go south of the border and note that Mary Robinson, becoming the first Irish president to attend the Remembrance service in St Patrick's in 1993, was a key moment in opening up territory. But then things changed rapidly after the ceasefires in 1994. One individual SDLP councillor had actually regularly attended events in Belfast, Dorita Field, who was herself a veteran of the South African forces in World War II. But she was perhaps a slightly different case to much of her party, because she was one of those who said she wasn't in the SDLP because she was an Irish nationalist, but because she was a socialist, and she regarded it as a socialist party. The big shift came post-ceasefire in 1994. Alex Atwood led the SDLP group in making what he said was a symbolic step in November of that year to attend the Remembrance Sunday event. And then in 1997, the very first nationalist mayor, Alban McGuinness, laid a poppy wreath during the Somme commemoration on the 1st of July. And when I interviewed him about this for Belfast Boys, he told me that there had been some discussion about whether he should wear a red poppy and a white poppy. But the SDLP were doing this because they thought it could build bridges to the Unionist community. He thought it could help to create better relations. And his comment was that they had decided, don't be doing something that would spoil the whole impact of doing this. Do it properly, do it well. I wonder if Jeremy Corbyn is taking note. Now, of course, Sinn Féin then took major initiatives, initially with peripheral involvement in events, not taking part in the formal parades, with Alex Maskey and Tom Hartley as mayor, and then later formally taking part with Martin O'Mula. The 6th Connaught Rangers project I want to mention very, very briefly. They were established in 2006. They consist of people from a wide range of nationalist backgrounds, including former Republican prisoners and people from a nationalist background who are just interested in their family history. But they've done incredibly important work in opening up new territory, and their publications, I think, are quite widely known. Now, just to conclude, really I wanted to come to this point about people not being offended at these events. I'm actually not in the least bothered if anyone's offended by anything I've said so far. I haven't set out to offend anyone, but I do go into the Falls and say, you know, your MP used to say that all nationalists wanted was a full part in the British Empire, which the blood and brains of Irishmen had helped to create. Of course, I mean not Paul Maskey or Gerry Adams, but Joe Devlin. But it's quite a thing. And I find people aren't offended, because what people are offended by is bad history. When you tell them good history, then they tend to take that on board. And the same applies when I've been into the Shankill and said that all their tourist information boards that say that 760 men joined up and only around 70 returned are wrong, because I identified 8,500 men from West Belfast, around 6,000 from the Shankill who joined up, and around 1,400 who were killed. The reason I do that is, because I know what family myths there are. My own family, a Lurgan Unionist family, brought me up talking about relatives who were on the Somme, which is what every Unionist family says. Well, of my 2 relatives from Lurgan who served in the war, one was killed in September 1915 in the 2nd Royal Irish Rifle at Hooge, so never made it to the Somme. And my grandfather served in the Royal Flying Corps, so he wasn't in the Ulster Division, even though he was a Covenanter. And I think telling these more complicated stories is the way to challenge what people hold on to. And if that upsets anyone, so be it. But I haven't found it so far.